You know what really pisses people off? It's not when you yell. It's not when you argue. It's not even when you tell them to go fuck themselves on your way out the door. It's when you just leave. No explanation, no drama, no final speech. Just gone. And if you're reading this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Because you've done it. Or you're about to. Or you're sitting there right now, still in that toxic situation, wondering if you're crazy for wanting to leave. Spoiler alert, you're not crazy. But before we get to why everyone's suddenly so afraid of you, we need to talk about how you got here. Because nobody wakes up one day and decides to become a loner. Something breaks you into it. Let's start with the wound. It started when you cared too much. Remember when you were that kid who felt everything? You'd walk into a room and immediately sense the tension. You'd know mom was upset before she even opened her mouth. You'd feel responsible when dad was having a bad day. Like somehow if you just behaved better, everyone would be happy. You were the family thermometer, the emotional sponge, the one who tried to fix everything. And everyone loved that about you, until they didn't. Picture this. You're upset about something. Maybe a friend betrayed you. Maybe something at school hurt. Maybe you just had a really bad day. So you do what kids are supposed to do. You go to the people who are supposed to care about you. And what do they say? Stop being so sensitive. You're overreacting. Other kids don't cry about stuff like this. Why do you always have to be so dramatic? Or my personal favorite, I'll give you something to cry about. So you learned real quick. Your feelings aren't welcome here. And here's the fucked up part. You didn't stop having feelings. You just stopped showing them. You learned to cry in the shower when nobody could hear you. You learned to smile when you were dying inside. But it gets worse. Because eventually, you trusted someone enough to let them in. Maybe it was a best friend. Maybe it was your first real relationship. Maybe it was a family member you thought was safe. You told them about your insecurities, your fears, your dreams, the stuff you never told anyone else. And they listened, they understood. They made you feel seen. Finally, someone gets it. And then one day you have an argument. And suddenly all that vulnerable stuff you shared, it comes flying back at you like shrapnel. Well, maybe if you weren't so insecure, remember when you told me about your dad? Yeah, maybe that's why you're like this. Or worse, you find out they've been telling other people. Your private pain became their entertainment. Your secrets became gossip. And that's when you learned. Vulnerability is just giving people ammunition. Trust is just handing someone a loaded gun and hoping they don't shoot. So you stopped sharing. You stopped opening up. You learned to keep your cards close to your chest because the moment you show someone your hand, they'll use it against you. Now let's talk about the one that really broke you. Maybe you became a people pleaser, not because you're weak, but because you're smart. You figured out that if you just gave people what they wanted, maybe they'd finally give you what you needed. Love, acceptance, basic human decency. So you tried. Oh man, did you try? You helped them move. You listened to them vent for hours. You canceled your plans when they needed you. You put their needs before yours. You bent over backwards, twisted yourself into knots, sacrificed your own comfort just to make them happy. And what did they say? If you really cared, you would. The goalpost kept moving. Every time you met their expectations, they raised the bar. Every time you proved your loyalty, they demanded more proof. It was never enough. And here's what really fucks with your head. You started believing it was your fault. Maybe I'm not trying hard enough. Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe if I just do this one more thing. You were running a race with no finish line, and they were standing on the sidelines telling you that you weren't running fast enough. By now, you've been told so many times that you're too sensitive, too needy, too dramatic, too much not enough, that you started to believe it. Someone cancels plans with you for the third time in a row, and when you say it hurts, they hit you with, wow, you're really making a big deal out of nothing. And suddenly you're apologizing for having feelings about being treated like shit. Someone promises to change, doesn't, and when you call them out, I never said that, and you're sitting there thinking, wait, am I going crazy? Did I imagine that entire conversation? Someone hurts you, and when you bring it up, you're remembering it wrong. That's not what happened. You're being dramatic again. And you start recording conversations in your head, keeping receipts, taking screenshots, not because you want to, but because you need proof that you're not losing your mind. You became a detective in your own life, constantly trying to prove to yourself that your reality is real. And it was the deepest one. Because they didn't just hurt you, they made you doubt yourself so much that you started hurting yourself on their behalf. But then something happened. Maybe it was a single moment, the straw that broke the camel's back. Maybe someone said something so outrageous that the fog lifted for a second and you saw clearly. Maybe you watched them do to someone else what they'd been doing to you, and suddenly you could see it objectively. Maybe you just got tired of bending, tired of explaining, tired of hoping, tired of trying. But whatever it was, you saw the pattern, and once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. It was like one of those optical illusions. You know, the ones where it looks like a vase until someone points out that it's actually two faces. And then you can never see just the vase again? That's what happened. You saw that. This wasn't love. This was control. This wasn't friendship. This was convenience. This wasn't family. This was dysfunction with a shared last name. This wasn't you being too sensitive. This was them being abusive and blaming you for noticing. The spell broke, and that's when you became a wounded loner. Not because you wanted to be alone, but because you finally understood that being alone was safer than being with people who made you feel alone anyway. So you started pulling back, not with some big dramatic announcement, not with a manifesto about how they hurt you. You just stopped. Stopped texting first, stopped making plans, stopped over-explaining yourself, stopped volunteering for emotional labor that was never reciprocated, stopped showing up to events where you felt invisible, stopped giving chances to people who'd already shown you exactly who they were. And here's what's wild. Most of them didn't even notice at first, because they were so used to you being the one who reached out, who made the effort, who held things together, that they just assumed you always would. They thought you'd always be there, waiting, ready to accept whatever crumbs they felt like throwing your way. But you weren't. You'd already left. They just hadn't realized it yet. And that's when you became dangerous, not to good people, not to people who actually care about you, but to the people who'd been benefiting from your pain. Now here's the thing everyone needs to understand. The core reason you're dangerous to them now. You leave emotionally long before you leave physically. Let me say that again, because this is the key to everything. By the time you actually walk out the door, you've already been gone for 6 months. See, most people, they telegraph their unhappiness. They fight, they cry, they threaten to leave. They give warnings, and at the end they don't even leave. But you went quiet. You stopped fighting. You stopped explaining. You stopped trying to fix things. And to everyone else that looked like peace, like you'd finally calmed down, like things were getting better. But in reality, you'd already made your decision. You were just waiting for the right moment to execute it. And that silent, invisible departure that happens in your head months before it happens in reality, that's what makes you truly unpredictable and dangerous to toxic systems. Because wounded loners aren't just people who've been hurt. Wounded loners are people who've been hurt, learned from it, and now operate on a completely different timeline than everyone expects. Remember how you used to be? You'd argue, you'd cry, you'd write long texts explaining exactly how they hurt you. You'd give them chance after chance after chance, always hoping this time would be different. You were so predictable. They could hurt you, wait a few days, send a half-assed apology, and boom, you'd be back. But now? Now when you're done, you're done. And here's what makes this so devastating to them. You decided you were done 6 months before you actually left. Think about that. For 6 months, you smiled at family dinners while mentally planning your exit, said, "I love you," while emotionally detaching, went through the motions while secretly preparing your departure, looked calm and fine, while quietly closing every door they thought would always be open. You weren't giving them the silent treatment. You were giving them silence as a gift, one last period of peace before you disappeared forever. There's no argument, no explanation, no exit interview where you detail all their failures and give them a chance to talk you out of leaving. You just disappear, and they never saw it coming, because by the time your body left, your heart had already been gone for half a year. And it destroys them, not because they actually care about you, but because their whole system depended on you staying. Let me give you an example. There's this toxic workplace, right? The boss is a nightmare. The culture is shit. Everyone's miserable, but everyone stays because that's just how it is, and at least it's a job. And then one day, the person who'd been there the longest, the one everyone relied on, the one who always stayed late, the one who made the whole broken machine actually function, just quits. No 2 weeks notice, no explanation. Just an email. I resign, effective immediately. And the whole place falls apart. Because it turns out that one person was holding together a structure that had no right to still be standing. That's you, the toxic partner who relied on your constant forgiveness. They panic when you stop fighting and just leave. The manipulative friend who needed someone to control. They lose their mind when you stop responding. The dysfunctional family that needed you to be the emotional dumping ground. They implode when you stop showing up to holidays. And here's the beautiful part. You didn't destroy anything. They destroyed themselves. You just stopped holding up the walls. In reality, you're in the exit phase. You've already emotionally checked out. You're already researching apartments or updating your resume or planning the conversation with your lawyer. You're already 6 steps ahead, playing chess while they think you're still playing checkers. The silence isn't healing. The silence is preparation. And when you finally stop trying to make yourself heard, you stopped making any noise at all. That's the real danger. You don't explode, you don't give warnings. You just silently complete your emotional exit while still physically present. And by the time you actually leave, you've already grieved the relationship and moved on. You removed the feedback loop they relied on. Manipulators need reactions. They need to know they're getting to you. Controllers need signals. They need to know when to adjust their tactics. But when you go completely flat and unreadable, when you're physically there but emotionally already gone, they're flying blind. And when you finally leave physically, they realize too late that the real departure happened months ago in your heart. Here's what makes you truly dangerous. You were trained by pain to become hyper-aware of everything. You can read tone shifts in a single word. You can feel the energy change when someone walks into a room. You notice when someone's story doesn't match what they said last week. You can spot manipulation techniques that most people don't even realize have names. Here it's like you've got this superpower, except it's not a power you wanted. It's a survival skill you were forced to develop. And here's the kicker. You don't confront them when you see it. You just collect data. Someone guilt trips you, you note it. Someone gaslights you, you note it. Someone love bombs you after treating you like shit, you note it. And you don't say a word. You just watch the pattern form. And when it's clear enough, when you've confirmed what you suspected, you don't argue about it. You just update your internal file. Status unsafe. Access level revoked. Recommendation exit. And then you start planning your departure. They never see it coming. I watched this happen with a friend once. They had this best friend who'd been using them for years, only called when they needed something, only showed up when it was convenient, always made everything about themselves. And my friend, they just kept being there, kept helping, kept supporting, until one day they didn't. The best friend called and my friend didn't answer, texted, and my friend gave a polite but distant response, made plans and my friend was busy. And after a few weeks of this, the best friend lost it. Why are you being so cold? What did I do? You're acting so different. And my friend just said, I'm not different, I just stopped accepting behavior I should have never tolerated in the first place. No yelling, no list of grievances, no dramatic speech, just a calm statement of fact. And that's more terrifying than any confrontation could ever be. You know what you learned through all that pain? If you wait for support, you'll be waiting forever. Most people can't make big decisions without consensus. They need their parents to approve, their friends to agree, their partner to support them, society to validate them. But you stopped asking. Not because you're arrogant, but because you learned that the people who should have supported you didn't. When you needed them to validate your feelings, they told you that you were overreacting. When you needed them to support your boundaries, they told you that you were being selfish. When you needed them to see your pain, they told you that other people had it worse. So you stopped waiting for permission. And now you do things that shock everyone. You quit the job everyone thought you should keep. You end the relationship everyone thought was perfect. You move across the country without asking anyone's opinion. You go no contact with family members everyone else tolerates. And when people ask, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you ask for advice? The answer is simple. Because I already knew what you'd say. You'd tell me to stay. You'd tell me to give them another chance. You'd tell me that I'm overreacting. So I stopped asking. To everyone else, these decisions look impulsive. But to you, you've been planning them for 3 years. You've run every scenario, considered every option, made peace with every consequence. You just didn't need an audience to make the decision. And that independence, that's terrifying to people who rely on groupthink to keep everyone in line. So you made a choice, peace over belonging. And you walked away from family members who made every gathering a nightmare, relationships where you gave everything and got nothing, communities that demanded you stay small to make others comfortable. And when people hit you with, "But they're family," you said, "So that doesn't give them the right to hurt me." But you've been friends for 10 years. You said, "And I've been unhappy for 9 of them. But everyone will think you're the bad guy." You said, "I'd rather be the villain in their story than the victim in mine." And you didn't feel guilty, not because you're heartless, but because you finally understood. Loyalty to people who hurt you isn't noble. It's self-destruction. Staying in toxic situations out of obligation isn't love. It's trauma bonding. Being present for people who aren't present for you isn't connection. It's one-sided emotional labor. So when the choice came down to stay and suffer or leave and heal, you left. Every time. Without the dramatic internal struggle that keeps most people trapped for decades. And you know why that's terrifying? Because you don't fear exile. You've already been the outsider, the black sheep, the one who didn't fit. So when they threaten to cut you off, to label you as difficult, to tell everyone you're the problem, it doesn't work. You're already comfortable on the outside, and that immunity to social pressure breaks their control completely. Here's what really pisses them off. You used to be vulnerable. You used to doubt yourself constantly. You used to accept their version of reality, even when it contradicted your own experience. You were easy to manipulate, because you'd been trained to believe that your perception was always wrong. But then you woke up, and once you saw the patterns, everything changed. Now when someone tries to guilt-trip you, you recognize it immediately. I can see what you're doing, and it's not going to work. When someone tries to gaslight you, I'm not discussing this, I know what happened. When someone tries to love-bomb you after treating you like shit, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm making decisions based on patterns, not promises. When someone tries emotional blackmail, that's unfortunate, but I'm still doing what's best for me. And when they realize their usual tactics don't work anymore, they lose their minds. That's when the name-calling starts. You've changed. Yeah, I learned. You're so cold now. No, I'm just no longer bleeding for you. You're heartless. I have a heart. I'm just not giving it to people who break it. You're ungrateful. I'm grateful to everyone who earned it. You didn't. And your response to all of it? No justification, no defense, no attempt to make them understand. Just complete indifference to their opinion of you. And that's what finally breaks them, because they no longer have access to your guilt, your self-doubt, your desperate need for approval. The door's been locked. The password's been changed. The vulnerability they'd been exploiting has been protected. And they're on the outside now. Here's what makes you different from people who are still hurt and reactive. You don't explode, you don't lash out. You don't sabotage, you don't seek revenge. You just end things calmly, quietly, permanently. And that's actually more devastating. Because when someone explodes, the toxic person can point to the explosion. See, they're crazy, they're the problem. Look how they're acting. But when you just leave, when you calmly, quietly, without drama, simply remove yourself from the situation, there's nothing to point to. No fight to retell. No dramatic scene to use as evidence that they were the victim. Just the uncomfortable reality that you looked at the situation, looked at them, decided it wasn't worth it and walked away. I saw this happen with someone leaving an abusive relationship. Everyone expected a dramatic breakup. Screaming, crying, police involvement. But you know what they did? Waited until their partner was at work. Packed their stuff, left a note that said, "I'm done, don't contact me," and moved in with a friend 3 states away. No forwarding address, no final conversation, no closure. Just gone. And their ex lost it. Not because they actually loved them, but because they couldn't control the narrative. They couldn't make themselves the victim. They couldn't point to anything and say, "Look what they did to me." Just absence. Clean, permanent, non-negotiable absence. And that's the most dangerous thing of all. In short, here's the core truth about why you're dangerous. You complete your emotional exit in private, and by the time you physically leave, you've already processed the grief, made peace with your decision, and moved on. Most people leave relationships, jobs, friendships, and they're still emotionally attached, still hoping for change, still leaving the door cracked open, just in case. But you? When you leave, you're already gone. You don't leave angry, you leave neutral. You don't leave hurt, you leave unbothered. You don't leave hoping, you leave knowing. You're not dangerous because you're aggressive or angry or violent. You're dangerous because you already left emotionally before they even realized there was a problem. No longer comply with systems that harm you. No longer stay predictable for people who relied on your patterns. No longer fall for manipulation tactics that used to work. No longer fear being alone. That's threatening to everyone who benefited from you staying small, staying quiet, staying broken. But here's what they'll never admit. You were always allowed to leave. The game was always optional. You just didn't know it yet. And now that you do, now that you've figured out how to emotionally exit before physically exiting, you've become impossible to control. Because by the time they realize you're unhappy, you've already grieved the relationship and planned your escape. By the time they try to fix things, you're already emotionally moved out. By the time they panic, you're already at peace with your decision. The danger isn't that you might leave. The danger is that you've already left. They just don't know it yet. And when the physical exit finally happens, it's not the beginning of the end. It's just the final paperwork on a decision you made months ago. That's your power. That's your danger. That's your freedom. If you made it this far, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've lived through the wounds that shaped you. You've survived the breaking point that woke you up. You've felt the power and the loneliness of becoming someone people can't control anymore. And I see you. Your strength isn't coldness. Your boundaries aren't cruelty. Your silence isn't rudeness. You survived by learning to protect yourself when nobody else would. And that's not something to be ashamed of. You did what you had to do. But listen, you don't have to stay in survival mode forever. There are people who will understand. Spaces that will feel safe. Connections that won't require you to sacrifice pieces of yourself to maintain them. You just have to stay open enough to recognize them when they show up. The right people will meet you where you are. They won't require you to explain, justify, or prove why you needed to leave. They'll just accept you. And those people? They're worth waiting for. You've spent long enough taking care of everyone else. You've spent long enough making yourself smaller so others could feel bigger. You've spent long enough carrying weight that was never yours to carry. It's time to choose yourself, not as cruelty, but as a protector, as self-love, as finally understanding that you deserve the same compassion you've given everyone else. Keep walking. People will always fear those who refuse to play the game, those who see the patterns and walk away, those who choose peace over performance, people like you. But their fear, their discomfort, that's not your problem to fix. That's their discomfort with being held accountable. So keep walking, keep choosing yourself, keep protecting your peace. Not everyone will understand, and that's okay. Drop a comment and tell us, what was your breaking point? What was the moment you realized you didn't have to stay anymore? I read every single comment. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to finally give themselves permission to walk away. You're not alone in this, even when it feels like you are. See you in the next one.